It's Greg Fowler for Online London, and with me is Gordon Saylor, who is a candidate for election in Ward 12. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Gregory.
If elected, how many hours per week on average do you expect that you'll spend working in your elected capacity?
My anticipation is between 20 and 30 hours on average.
Do you think ward councillors currently are paid enough for the amount of work that they'll be doing during the next term of City Council?
Absolutely. I'm prepared to take this job on at the current compensation level, yes.
London's governance model is undergoing significant change, and that includes the elimination of the Board of Control. Do you think that this will increase the necessity for ward councillors to inform themselves about issues outside of their own ward boundaries?
Absolutely. That'll be very important this year, while going forward in this council, to take much more responsibility for the finances of the city.
Do you live within the geographical boundaries of the electoral area in which you are contesting the election?
No, I don't.
How many of your post-teenage years have you lived in London?
I've been in London since 1973.
Have you attended any standing committee meetings over the course of the last 4 years?
I've gone to a few planning committee meetings and a few CAPS committee meetings.
Have you attended any Board of Control meetings over the last 4 years?
Board of Control, no.
Are you familiar with the Municipal Act and the Municipal Councillor's Guide?
Loosely, yes.
The Strengthening Neighbourhoods Task Force recommended development of a neighbourhood matching fund type program for large and small community projects, other than celebrations or events. Do you support that recommendation?
I'm not familiar with that, so I'd have to pass.
Do you support development of a community program to fund the creation of public art in public places?
I say yes to that. There's a need for public art, and I support the introduction of that to the city.
Should the City of London and its boards and commissions embrace the concept of making their data open and accessible to everyone as often as is possible, and adopting open standards for that data?
Oh, of course.
When existing software applications need to be replaced or when software licenses have to be renewed, should the city adopt the use of open source software whenever that's possible?
I pass on that. I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak to that.
Is the city's communication department being given enough resources, money, and personnel to properly maintain the city website and to inform citizens in a timely fashion?
I think they could do a better job. Whether they need more resources, I don't know, but I think they could do a better job of communication.
Should citizens be able to subscribe to subject-specific RSS feeds from City Hall in order to stay informed?
I didn't understand that question.
Should citizens be able to download the agendas of upcoming public meetings, including advisory committee meetings, at least a week in advance?
Oh, yes.
Despite the requirement of the Municipal Act that all City Hall meetings be public, except for specific reasons, it's been argued that they most often are not because of the inability of the public to hear what's being said. Do you support the adoption of a policy which mandates the use of microphones in all public meetings at City Hall?
Well, I've never had difficulty following the meetings, but in the interest of ensuring that everybody has the option to understand what's going on, there's certainly value in that.
Do you think that the city ought to be webcasting all of its public meetings?
I think that's a very good idea.
Should the city's boards and commissions be webcasting all of their public meetings?
A very good idea as well.
Should the chairpersons of public meetings at City Hall ought to have to announce motions and amendments to motions and the number of votes for and against those motions so that the public can understand what's taking place?
Yes.
Should London hire an Auditor General?
No.
Should homeowners have to pay a percentage of the cost for the repair of damage to underground infrastructure on their own property that's been caused by city-owned trees?
I would support them paying for for infrastructure repairs on their own property, regardless of cause. Well, regardless of whether it's city-owned trees that cause it, yes.
Do you agree with the placemaking concept of neighborhood gateways?
Pass.
Should there be increased user representation on the London Transit Commission?
I don't know what the representation is now, but it'd be fair that there is user representation, yes, at some level.
If the City of London is going to provide venture capital to businesses, should the city be guaranteed a return on its investment in the event that those businesses become profitable?
Yes.
Should people be allowed to naturalize their lawns?
Yes.
Are London's pedestrians and pedestrian issues sufficiently represented at City Hall?
No.
The traffic and parking bylaw prohibits people from using any sidewalk for any purpose other than pedestrian traffic, except as specifically permitted. Should downtown patios, which consume most of the width of the public sidewalk, be permitted?
If they consume most of the sidewalk, no. I think the majority of the sidewalk should be for pedestrian traffic, but there's certainly room, I think, to allow some form of patios to exist.
When closure of a public sidewalk for construction purposes takes place, what steps should be required to ensure that pedestrians are not forced out onto the roadway in a manner which puts them at risk?
Well, I can do as they've done on York Street and actually use the concrete barriers to block off areas that would make it safe for pedestrians to pass.
Is the warranted sidewalk program sufficiently funded?
I'm not familiar with that.
Is the warranted walkway program sufficiently funded?
I'm not familiar with that.
Old unlit streets are not lit unless there's a local improvement program application and a cost-sharing agreement amongst owners. Do you agree with that policy?
I would say yes.
Do you think that special funding ought to be provided to London Police for the purchase of additional Speedwatch radar trailers and the cost of having the auxiliary police unit deploy them on a frequent basis?
If the interest is to monitor traffic and curtail speeding and red light running, I would support that, yes.
Should the city be spending as much as it is per year from the federal gas tax to construct on-road bike lanes in London?
I support the addition of on-road bike lanes in the city, regardless of the source of funding.
Should bicycles be allowed on public sidewalks?
Not on sidewalks, no.
Should persons in motorized wheelchairs and other mobility devices that are on the public sidewalk be obliged to yield for pedestrians?
I think there's room to share. There's certainly people in motorized devices such that certainly need to be considered pedestrians.
Should the city install more bike racks?
I would agree with that, yes, they should.
Do you think that theft of bikes is an important issue?
I don't know how big an issue it is. Important issue for individuals. I don't know that it's a big issue in the city, though.
Do you have any suggestions about what might be done to combat that problem?
I think individuals have to assume some responsibility for securing their property.
Is the city currently spending enough money to promote its web-based ride match service?
I am not familiar with that service.
Should there be dedicated and discounted carpool parking spaces on downtown streets and in city-owned lots?
I'll pass on that one.
Should every signalized London intersection provide advanced left turns?
Not everyone. I don't think the traffic capacity requires it at every intersection.
Does the city currently provide sufficient funding for the community gardens program?
I'm not familiar with that. Well, I'm not familiar with the funding for that program, so I'll pass.
Should all dogs have to be muzzled when they're not on their owner's property?
No.
Should dogs be allowed at community events?
For the safety and security of people and the security of animals, I would suggest that that's not an appropriate place to have dogs at community events.
Do you think that people ought to be able to raise chickens in their backyards?
I personally don't have a problem with people raising chickens in their backyards, no.
That concludes the question and answer interview. Thanks for your cooperation.
Thank you very much.